My name is Teresa Meyers, and I'm 32 years old. There was always a particular scent in that house, one I could never fully put into words. A mix of fresh paint, my mother's cooking, wood polish, and something deeper beneath it all. Something that only exists in spaces shaped by love over decades. My parents didn't hand me a present wrapped with a ribbon. They handed me the outcome of 20 years of double shifts, skipped holidays, and quiet sacrifices that I only came to appreciate once I was old enough to look back and add them up. My father drove the same beat-up car for 11 years just so our savings could grow. My mother wore the same winter coat for 7 winters in a row. And when I turned 29, they sat me down at that old kitchen table and slid a ring of keys across to me, saying simply, "This is yours now." I broke down crying for a full 20 minutes. I moved in with my husband, Ryan, about 8 months before any of the trouble began. At first, everything about our life in that house felt like the start of something real. Sunday morning breakfasts, decorating for the holidays, the easy, comfortable rhythm of 2 people creating a home side by side. Ryan was attentive, funny, and I truly believed we saw eye to eye on all the things that mattered. I told him the whole story behind that house. Every detail of what my parents gave up, what that address meant to our family, and he nodded, assuring me he understood. I believed him. That was my first miscalculation. The change crept in slowly, as most harmful things do. Ryan started bringing up his mother, Vivien, more and more often in our conversations. Vivien needed extra space. Vivien felt cramped in her apartment. Vivien had always dreamed of having her own room when she came to visit. At first, I listened without alarm, figuring they were just passing remarks that would fade on their own. But they didn't fade. They piled up. One evening in November, Ryan sat across from me at the dining table, the very table my parents had chosen together at an estate sale 30 years earlier, and told me he'd been giving serious thought to converting the guest room and the small study into permanent quarters for his family. His mother, his younger brother, and his brother's girlfriend. 3 people, 2 rooms, inside a house my parents had sacrificed their lives to give me. I just stared at him, waiting for the moment he'd reveal it was a joke. That moment never came. I asked him carefully if he'd forgotten whose house this actually was. He responded with something that still rings in my ears. He said, "What's yours is ours, Teresa." I didn't answer right away. I let that statement hang in the air between us, and I noticed he didn't even hesitate. He had prepared for this. He was at ease saying it. 3 days later, Vivien arrived with 2 suitcases and the air of someone who had already made up her mind that she was staying. She walked through my front door without waiting for an invitation and started surveying the rooms the way a landlord inspects a property before renovations. She opened doors, made remarks about closet space, peered into the study, and nodded with a kind of satisfaction that made my jaw clench. Ryan stood slightly behind her, like a man who knew he'd overstepped but had already gone too far to backtrack. Vivien found me in the kitchen and launched into a speech she had clearly rehearsed as well. She talked about family unity. She talked about how, in her culture, family doesn't let families struggle on their own. She talked about how Ryan had always been giving and how she hoped his wife would rise to match that generosity. Every sentence landed like it was crafted to make disagreement seem selfish. I recognized the pattern. I'd heard manipulative speeches before, just never inside my own kitchen. Then she extended her hand. She asked me directly, without pause, without any visible sense of what she was really requesting, for a copy of the house keys. The kitchen fell very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear Ryan shifting his weight somewhere behind his mother. And in that moment, I felt something unexpected move through me. Not fury, not alarm, but a strange stillness. The kind of calm that only arrives when you finally see clearly what's happening and know exactly what you're going to do about it. I looked at Vivien's open hand. I looked at her face, which wore the expression of someone used to getting what she asked for. And then I smiled. Not a polite smile, not a nervous one, but the calm, unhurried smile of a woman who knows something the other people in the room don't yet know. I set down the dish towel I'd been holding. I straightened up and said something quietly, clearly, without a single tremor in my voice, Something that made Ryan freeze completely and drained the color from Vivien's face so fast it was like watching a light switch off behind her eyes. But before I tell you what I said, you need to understand everything that led up to that moment, because the words only carry their full weight when you know what was behind them. I said, "Vivien, I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I'd like to clear it up right now, while we're all standing here together." My voice didn't waver. That even surprised me. Ryan had taken a small step forward, the way people do when they sense a situation slipping from their control, and Vivien's outstretched hand hadn't moved. Still waiting with that practiced patience of someone who expects the world to eventually bend to them. I let the silence hang one more beat, just long enough for both of them to feel its weight, and then I continued. I told her that this house wasn't Ryan's to offer. I told her it wasn't mine to share in the way she was imagining. I told her slowly and clearly that this house had first belonged to my parents, that my father's 11 years in a car held together by rust and sheer will were built into these walls, that my mother's 7 winters in a coat that should have been replaced were part of this foundation, and that when they placed those keys in my hands, they were placing 30 years of their lives into my keeping. And I was not about to hand any piece of that to someone who walked through my front door with suitcases and a remodeling plan and called it family unity. Vivien's hand dropped. Not slowly. It dropped the way things do when the muscles holding them up simply stop getting the signal to stay. Her face, which had carried that calm, practiced assurance since the moment she arrived, did something I hadn't seen before. It went still, then it went pale. And then the expression that replaced that confidence was something closer to shock. Genuine, unrehearsed, hitting like cold water. Ryan said, "Teresa. Just my name. The way people say it when they don't have anything else ready." I turned to him then, because what I needed to say next was meant for him more than for her. I told him that I loved him and that I'd meant every promise I made when we married. But that love didn't mean surrendering the proof of my parents' lives. I told him that what was mine was ours. I agreed with that completely. But that what was my parents' was sacred, and those two things weren't the same category. And somewhere in the planning of this conversation, he had blurred the two, and I needed him to separate them immediately. I walked to the kitchen drawer, the second one from the left, where I kept the house documents. I pulled out the folder my father had prepared when he transferred the deed, organized the way he organized everything, neat and deliberate, every page in its proper order. I laid it on the table. I opened it to the page with the names on it. I turned it to face them both, and I tapped my finger once on the line that counted. My name. Only my name. Not Ryan's name. Not a family name. Not a shared name.
Mine.
Vivien looked at the document. She stared at it for a long time. Ryan looked at it too, and something in his stance shifted. A deflation, slow and total, like air escaping something that had been overinflated for too long. I told Vivien directly, without cruelty, but also without softness, that she was welcome in my home as a guest. That guest rooms existed for guests. That I held no hostility toward her personally, and no desire to create distance between Ryan and his family. But that the conversation about keys, about permanent rooms, about restructuring the interior of a house my parents had sacrificed 2 decades to build, that conversation was finished. It had ended the moment she extended her hand, and she would leave today understanding that. She left that afternoon. She didn't leave with anger, which I had anticipated. She left with something quieter than anger, a kind of recalibration, the adjustment a person makes when they realize the room they walked into wasn't the one they'd planned for. Ryan drove her to her sister's place across town. He came home 2 hours later and sat across from me, not speaking for almost 5 minutes. When he finally spoke, he didn't defend her. He didn't defend himself either. He said, "I should have talked to you before any of this happened." I told him he was right. He said he knew that now, in a way he hadn't before. I told him that knowing it now was the only version of knowing available to us. So we would have to work from there. Over the following 3 weeks, we had the most honest conversations of our marriage. Things that had been simmering beneath the surface rose to the top. Patterns that had been forming quietly got named out loud. It was uncomfortable, the way necessary things usually are. And it was also the first time I felt like we were truly building something together, rather than just coexisting inside the same walls. Ryan called his mother twice a week. She was cordial with me when we spoke, in the careful way of someone learning new boundaries. It wasn't warmth, not right away, but it was respect. And respect, I've learned, is sometimes the more honest version of warmth anyway. It doesn't ask you to feel something you don't. It just asks you to acknowledge what's real. My parents don't know most of what happened. My mother would worry. My father would go quiet in that specific way he does when something has threatened something he loves, and I didn't want to put that weight on him. What I do know is that the house still smells the same. Fresh paint, wood polish, something warm underneath. My father's 11 years are still in these walls. My mother's 7 winters are still in this foundation. And the keys are exactly where they belong in my hands, where my parents placed them.